Let me say, my name is Roger Berkowitz, and this is the virtual reading group of the Hannah Arendt Center at Bard College. And we are in the midst of reading Hannah Arendt's book, The Promise of Politics. Actually, it's a book edited by Jerome Cohn. We began last week reading the last sort of large part of this book, which is also the the core. It's the majority of the book, called An Introduction to Politics. What is it, and why? And Bill, I think, rightly says that we need to talk about what's going on in politics. I wrote a fair bit about that. It came out yesterday in the Amor Mundi for those interested in it. I think so. I hadn't thought to say something immediately on it. What I'll say is this. The core thought of this essay, which I'm going to try and get through, is that we have a deep prejudice against politics today. And that prejudice against politics leads us to try and replace politics, to try and get rid of politics. And while there have been a number of different replacements for politics, the primary one that has emerged is what we call administration, a turn away from politics to administration. And that Arendt is going to say comes from a prejudice that's deeply rooted, and one that she doesn't think can be undone simply by disagreeing with it or anything like that. What the sections we read today are about is how this prejudice against politics emerged. How does that connect to what's going on in the world today? I think in many ways, but what we are seeing, at least since the 1970s or 80s, are increasing numbers of people on both the left and the right feeling deeply that the political system doesn't speak for them and doesn't represent them. And what you have seen emerge out of that are large, often unruly movements, whether it's Occupy or Black Lives Matter on the left, or the Tea Party on the right. Now, Arendt, in her essay, Is America by Nature a Violent Society, says, yes, it is. And it is because in America, we balance in this weird way a kind of raucous politics with also a kind of lawfulness and a desire for lawfulness. And that balance is sort of the key, she thinks. The problem is that when you come up with someone like Donald Trump, right? I mean, Donald Trump, some of us have been trying to write and think about him for 4 years. and I don't want to like, but he's someone, he is someone who's given his own resentments voice to such a degree that he can't see the common outside of his own ego. And what happened the other day it was, I don't think, a coup. I mean, people can disagree with me. It was certainly it was, I don't think Donald Trump has it in him to actually bring about a coup. I don't think he has it. I think he's a coward. I think he's afraid to lose. I don't think he wants to admit defeat. And he has, and he spurs people on, but he's not willing to go all the way. I mean, look, throughout the last 4 years, if he'd wanted to go all the way, maybe he could have. I don't know, but he didn't. And what you saw happen yesterday is, I think, 2 days ago, was a very positive thing in the United States, which is finally, after 4 years of not doing it, people drew a line and said, there's a line you can't cross over. So how does that relate to politics? I think it relates in that there is a fundamental idea in our political system that the winners win and the losers lose. And there's a fundamental idea in our system that we don't allow violence to carry the day. Those are basic political insights that to me underlie the American democratic system. And as I see it, over the last 2 days, they've been reaffirmed by the vast majority of people in the country in what I take to be a very positive, a positive and hopeful sense. That doesn't mean there aren't still dangers. I think there are, but that reaffirmation of those basic democratic habits, as I called them in the piece I wrote, are to me quite something to take hope in. So I see what happened 2 days ago as a real positive a rejection of the Trump phenomena at the end of the Trump presidency. How long it will last, who knows? But to me, it was a very, I took great solace in what happened, at least on the level. Obviously, I was quite disturbed and angry at what happened, before that, but the reaction to it, I thought, was quite positive. So I'm happy to, I think we should talk about it, but let me see if I can, if that's all right, Bill. I mean,
No, Roger, it's not all right. First of all,
I'd
I'm
like to
offended
jump
by
in
the
too.
by the equivalences that you make between Black Lives Matter and what happened the other day.
Yes.
I'm offended by the fact that we seem so impotent on this call, that we're sputtering and talking about terms like that. I am going to get off the call because I'm not going to be a good citizen today.
Bill, Bill, can I just say, I don't think I made a.
You did. You said
it did. It sounded that way to me as well.
You said unruly, right?
Well, okay,
Black people were not protected in the way those people were the other day. How does your analysis play up to that? How does it? That was also revealed the other day, wasn't it?
Bill, can we? I mean, I'm happy to talk about this, and
I'm leaving.
No. Bill, please let me say something.
I have nothing to give.
No, don't leave. Don't leave.
All right,
Bill,
don't leave.
You leave.
Bill, listen to me.
You do not need me. You do not need
No,
me.
wait. Bill, if you don't listen, I can't say something that I really want to say to you. I think that you have a very good point. I think that you have a point. We should talk about it. This piece of reading provides incredible insights to think, I think, along the lines of what you want to discuss. And I think that your contribution is very valuable, but we have to be able to talk about it. I want to say something about slavery and freedom as the founding of this country, something that Arendt acknowledges in this article. So there are ways to address it in a way that we can all discuss. And I would extremely appreciate your presence in the discussion.
Could I say something, please?
Yeah.
I was
to me, putting aside the reading for today, the overwhelming experience of witnessing what we witnessed is the proof of what Black Lives Matter is all about. I mean, the possibility that a group of even 100 people of color could have stormed the Capitol,
right,
and not been resisted, and having many people killed is ridiculous. I mean, this is proof of what we all know. And it's the overriding experience, that plus the incitement, not just by Trump, but all these other people that are around him who have been encouraging this. And the fact that some of them are now trying to flee at the last minute so they don't have to undertake their responsibility to use the 25th Amendment or whatever else to get rid of him. It's too little too late. It's outrageous.
Yeah.
And it's obvious to everybody. So, I mean, I feel, frankly, Roger, like we have to lead with that. That's the most dominant, blatant thing that we've all experienced in the last few days. And that any other, I mean, all this other discussion is, of course, important, and we should go to the text and we should keep reading it. But there has to be a sense of outrage and just enough already. How much longer can it go on? Look at all the murders that have taken place of Black people with impunity. And that's what happened 2 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
With impunity, a bunch of white people who, with guns, with the intent to do evil, with the intent to take down the government, as disorganized and inept as they are, and even their leader who said, I'm marching there with you, and then he doesn't. He goes back to party at the White House and watch on a screen what was going on while they're playing music.
Yeah.
I mean, it's outrageous. And that people can stand by and not just, we should be taking to the barricades. We really should be.
Roger, can I please say something?
Yeah.
I've been trying to jump in here, and by no stretch do I mean to compare you to Trump. I'm not. I mean, but I think that what is critical in these moments is to take account of the seemingly more trivial, more easy slips of the tongue, such as what did sound like you equating, oh golly, there's stuff on the right, there's stuff on the left. And I thought, are you kidding me? You're equating the two? To my mind, that is part of the thought process that has gotten us where we are these days. It's been going on for a long time. It's not, you didn't start it, Trump didn't start it. It's been happening for a long time.
Margaret.
But when we put them together, I think that we all have a responsibility to look at some of the ways in which the eyes we look at the world through.
Margaret, you and Bill at times have both said this thing to me, that I equate the left and the right. And honestly, I think that's a somewhat forceful misreading of the way I spoke. But I think that what I did say is that there's political anger on the left and there's political anger on the right. I think that's true. I then said that what happened yesterday was, and it's happened for the last 4 years, has crossed a line that I think is fundamentally different. I don't think it's wrong to understand that there are common sources to anger on both sides. I also don't think it's wrong to point out that that what happened yesterday was, look, it was on a level much worse and much greater. But we have to understand that criticizing the move to violence and mob-like behavior, which I do and want to do, which happened yesterday, doesn't preclude the fact that some of the people on the right are engaged in civil disobedience and protest that's not mob-like. And it shouldn't allow us to deny the fact that some people on the left engaged in mob-like behavior too over the summer. And we have to accept that too. I think that you can't, that is not to equate the left and the right. That is not to equate what happened yesterday with what happened over the summer. But it is to say that we have real problems on both sides of people, people blurring the line between civil disobedience and mob-like insurrection. And that has to be
police reaction that is so different, isn't
Yes,
it?
well, the police reaction. The police
yes.
reaction is different, and I fundamentally agree with you on that.
How do you contextualize it, Roger, in terms of what the analysis you're trying to help us back into Hannah Arendt's writing? How is that inequity in your analysis? You did not put that inequity in there. This is the problem with trying to talk about a philosophical tradition in the West that has excluded Black and brown people from the beginning. This is a problem. I have said it, and I've been a bore in saying it. How it is not about the right and the left, Roger. Can we look at what we saw as a society the other day? What we saw about ourselves the other day? How can you put that into your analysis? I need you to lead me in my thinking. Do not get mealy-mouthed.
I don't want to be mealy-mouthed. I think what happened, I think Donald Trump has, for the last 4 years and the last 2 months, created an alternate reality. And a bunch of people really do believe him. 40% of the country believes he legitimately won the election. I think it's a serious problem. The fact that, what happened with the police, it's certainly, I think there's a difference. So the comparison I would want to make, Bill, and I don't know if this is mealy-mouthed or not, is just like in Portland and Seattle, where the police didn't want to create a bloodbath and basically let the people in and took over parts of the downtown. I think the people in DC did the same thing. Was it right in Seattle and wrong in DC? I think it was probably wrong in both, or I think it was right in both places to not create a bloodbath. I don't think a bloodbath would have been in anyone's interest in either instance. And so, I'm not sure what the other alternative would have been.
Roger, what happened in Portland was not a full-on attack on our electoral system. It was not. You're equivocating again and making a comparison. They are not the same. That was in Portland. This was on our symbolic capital. That's what I'm talking about. That is not the same thing.
Well, I don't think it's the same thing, but I think that the police reaction, I'm just so I don't be mealy-mouthed, Bill, should we have, they didn't have enough people at the time, but should they have shot them all?
First of all, they should have been better prepared as they were with Black Lives Matter. Why was it different? Why were they not prepared? They had days and weeks to prepare because Black and brown people are more dangerous.
They didn't prepare in part because of they actually made changes to their protocol. They did not intervene because of changes made after the Black Lives Matter protests.
Yeah.
That was actually, I believe they stood down, but the New York Times Daily podcast actually came out today saying they made changes deliberately because they wanted to avoid what happened last time around because they were so criticized for it. Mayor Bowser, as well as the other parts of the government. Although I'm sure also there are a bunch of probably crazy police who were pro-Trump and standing down on purpose also.
I'm sure there were, but I guess.
Do you all buy that?
No.
Do you buy that in the discussion we've been having about systemic racism? Am I crazy? Something was revealed, Roger, the other day.
But
you're not crazy, and it was totally revealing. I don't buy those explanations for a minute. And as a white person, I don't buy those explanations for a minute.
But Bill, we all agree with you. I think we all agree with you.
I don't even want you to agree with me, but I just thought the temperature, the heat has got to go up so that Hannah Arendt's words pop. That when we begin to talk about principles and distinctions, there is a background of something that is not making us all feel impotent and privileged and helpless. I'm being redundant.
No, but I think that the theoretical point that she makes in this article that comes across with full force is that for the foundation of freedom, the condition of possibility is slavery. She is saying exactly, well, almost exactly in those words. So we can think about, that conceptually and how that was revealed in the fact that on Wednesday, what we saw were like two nations, if you want to put it in those terms.
Mm-hmm.
The repetition of the founding in 1776 of this republic and freedom, quote unquote, right, on the back of slavery. And this is present, among other things, in this article by Arendt. So we can think theoretically and politically, how can we think about freedom that is not freed from necessity in order to refound this republic?
So my brothers and sisters, thank you for indulging my indulgence right now. I would like to give it back to Roger. Roger, please respect my brother. Now do your thing. With the heat in the air right now, go through and in dispassionate terms, analyze what Hannah Arendt has written. We're all vibrating now. I thank you all for indulging it. I apologize for any offense, Roger.
There's no offense, Bill. I always appreciate you. And I appreciate your heat. And I appreciate your passion. I do. And I think what Hannah Arendt's going to say here is going to be very passionate in many ways. I'm not sure it's going to satisfy, honestly, because I'm not sure this. We'll see where it goes. This is a complicated group of texts that we're reading. And let me try and read it with the heat that you ask for. But let me also say some of that heat is going to be maddening because I don't think her words are going to give you everything you want. In fact, they're going to push in many different directions, I think. But that said, the text we're reading today is about what she calls the meaning of politics. And she says that the meaning of politics is very simple. It's freedom. Now, right then and there, a lot of us should be pretty upset, right? Let's bring the heat. Because in saying that, she's declaring war. Or, I'm being a little heated. She's not declaring war, but she's opposing the entire tradition of Marxist and social justice politics. She is, and we should take that. We should not deny that. What she's saying is that politics is about freedom. And thus, it's not about life, right? It's not about life. That's the big opposition that she wants to make. And she says, though, in our time, politics has largely come to be about life, and about the social justice, and not about freedom. There are reasons for that, and we have to take them seriously. But we want to ask how the meaning of politics has changed over time, and that's sort of the frame of these pages. She begins on page 114 to 115 with what we read for today, by arguing that we define politics by justification as a means to an end. we define politics by justification as a means to an end. At the end of this section of what we read today, she's going to say that this is a prejudice. And it's not actually there, and that it's a prejudice that is going to be based on real experiences that namely the experiences of those few of us who are intellectuals, who have a feeling of wanting to be protected from politics, and also those of us who are Christians or religious people who want to be protected from politics, and those of us who are afraid of politics, who want to be protected from politics. There's probably others as well that I'm leaving out, but those experiences that those of us who are intellectuals, religious people, fearful have given rise over the course of 2,000 years, she says, to serious prejudices against politics. And so she goes back to the beginning in some way, to Aristotle, who defined man as a political animal, and said that we typically today think of that means that man is always political, that man is by nature political. And she says that's not what Aristotle meant, right? What Aristotle meant is that man is an animal that has the capacity to be political. They can live in politics, even though most won't. And that for him, living in politics or living politically means to live in a polis, in a city, among equals, without compulsion, force, and without rule over another, as equals among equals. This is on page 117. And that we decide and we live our lives not by ruling over others, but by speaking and persuading against others. And that there's this equality before the law, she says, in the Greeks under Aristotle, meant that all men have the same claim to political activity and to speak for one another. What this means for her is that for Greeks, political freedom is spatial. It requires a space where people gather and come together and talk and figure out their way they're going to live together. She hopes that what she's just said, she says, will cure us of the modern prejudice that politics is a necessity, that it always exists. She says it doesn't. It only happens in those rare moments when we live in a polis amongst equality. And that in those rare moments when we live in a polis amongst equality, politics happens, and it reveals to us that what the meaning of politics is freedom, that politics and freedom are bound together. This idea that politics and freedom are bound together, she says, is connected to the first virtue of politics, which is courage and the willingness to sacrifice one's life. Right? Now here we immediately begin raising questions about protest and safety and security and violence. And what she says is that courage is the earliest of all political virtues, and it's the daring to cross the threshold of your house and enter the political world and risk your life for what you believe in. This for her is a virtue, to risk your life for what you believe in. She makes now, so I mean, you know, one of the things that we've been talking about, and that I think is, you know, I said earlier that one of the cardinal habits of politics, of democratic politics, is that we resent violence. We resent those who seek to use violence to disrupt the public sphere. And I think that's right. But I also think it's right that, and as she said, that if you really are a democracy, violence is going to be deeply inherent in your nature. And that you're going to walk a fine line between the tendency to violence and the resentment and real anger towards those who resort to violence. I'm just going to mute everyone so that we don't have those conversations. The Greeks, she says, saw speech as a kind of action, and thus saw this idea of speaking in public as a kind of action. And now here's the sort of second move she makes in this essay. So the first one is about the prejudice against politics and how politics is about freedom for the Greeks. The second move she's going to make is that there's a difference between the way the Greeks understood speech and the way we understand speech. The Greeks understood speech as action, as a kind of spontaneity, as a way to begin and initiate things. They saw speaking as a kind of political act, one that could really transform the world. She says that we increasingly see speech as merely free speech, as freedom of opinion. And this is one of her longest and most interesting discussions of what free speech is in her writings. So just to make this distinction apparent, because I think it's important, the Greeks saw speech as action, as a kind of spontaneity, as not governed by logic. They compared speaking to being an artist, or she compares speaking to be an artist, an initiator, someone who acts in isolation. And so the Greek actor begins in isolation, comes up with their ideas, and bursts onto the scene with a speech or an act that initiates or can initiate new political actions. Increasingly for us, speech is not that kind of bursting onto the scene phenomena. Speech is to say what I please, and it has this, and I'll use the words Bill used, it's cool. It's not heated. She says on 128, we know from experience that no one can adequately grasp the objective world in its full reality on his own, because the world shows and reveals itself to him from only one perspective, which corresponds to his standpoint in the world and is determined by it. So here's an argument for his free speech, that it enlarges our perspective. It's always about speaking with others. And in the freedom of speaking with one another, she says, only in this freedom of speaking with one another does the world, as that about which we speak, emerge in its objectivity and visibility from all sides. And so this free speech idea is a kind of cooler idea. It's about knowing. It's about an intellectual expansion of our universe. It's about understanding and seeing the world in objectivity. It's a very intellectual idea, right? It's an important insight that she has. And she traces it back to Plato's Academy, and says that the Academy of Plato didn't see the people in the Academy as individual free people, but it saw it as a sort of a few who wanted to be protected from the many, the politics. And so the free speech of the few in the academy was to be protected from the political world. It was to be freed from politics. This alternate tradition, right, that begins with Plato and the academy, and that emerges into the modern era, is for Arendt what's behind the move from politics to administration. What she says on 134 is the administration and provision of life's necessities in peacetime and with defense in times of war, such that politics is reduced to the lower level, whose task was to sustain life within the public space of politics. So if this is the sort of second story of this text, as I understand it, which is that politics was about freedom and free speaking as individuals, but it has increasingly become about a kind of administration designed to allow little groups here, whether you're Christians or intellectuals or whatever it is, to speak amongst yourself freely. But politics itself is not supposed to bring the fire, to use Bill's words. And so now politics becomes not an end in itself, but a means to non-political ends, to protect the experts in the academy, to allow the Christians and the Jews and the Muslims and others to worship, in a sense to allow social spheres to exist, whether they're spheres of chess players or spheres of academics or spheres of artists, and to, in a sense, preserve a world in which they can do what they want to do without being threatened by politics. The last sort of part of this section, which emerges, is that what this does is it makes politics not about freedom, not about action, not about fire, but about life, about trying to keep things in order and orderly. And in doing so, it de-emphasizes, it makes politics small. And so the meaning of politics disappears, she says, so that on page 151, 2 pages before the end of what we read today, she can say, does politics still have meaning at all? And her answer is, it has largely become a kind of prejudice against fire, right? Against bringing the fire, against anything that might cause disorder or violence. And part of the reason is that we're so terrified of the technology of power, whether it's nuclear bombs or the police forces and the technologies they have. And so we are terrified by the fact that politics might actually be free and thus unruly, and bring in new voices and allow people to challenge the status quo and things of that sort. And it's out of that terror, she says, that we've developed. It started with Plato's terror at what the politics did to Socrates, right? And it ends with our terror of a world in which we are just fearful that politics might destroy the world, such that we have defanged politics, run away from it, and left it meaninglessness, simply as a kind of attempt to keep order and in society. I think what I was trying to equate on different sides, be it left or right or different groups, was not the treatment of police or not their ends or anything like that, but that there are increasingly people across the political spectrum who are repoliticizing in ways that the other sides find terrifying, and there's a call for order and a call for, process and all these things, which I support. But Arendt is making us aware of the impotence of our small idea of politics. That's how I read the pages we had before us today. So I understand there's a lot of heat and there's a lot of things to discuss. I'm open to all sorts of interventions, but I'm just gonna let Mara start because she has her first hand up, and I'm gonna respect that process at the beginning. Mara?
Yes, thank you, Roger. I think I said enough, so I don't want to just overtake, but I really think that I know it's about the meaning of politics, but I want just to point to the fact that, Arendt acknowledges here something that we mentioned in previous discussions, right? That the condition of possibility of freedom is the freedom from need, and in the US terms that meant slavery. In the Greek polis it also meant slavery. So once she jumps to the meaning of politics and the political, she is already in the realm of the founded freedom that has been founded again, right, on need and on the getting rid of need, I'm sorry, and slavery. So
yeah, no, I think that's a really really important, Marla. And let me just add one thing you're saying.
One thing that I want to say is that, what we saw on Wednesday, bringing it back, it is exactly that. The founding tension in the US Constitution, not only in the document of the constitutions, but at like the formation of the US, of these, relegated to pre-political, that was slavery, and political, who was those free, white men, property white men. So for me, the question is, how do you refound the republic, right? In terms that you can both think about political and freedom without slavery?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's two parts of it, and the last part I think is goes to the heart of her essay and the heart of her work, which is that refounding at times requires a revolution, right? You're not going to refound things by saying let's keep order. And
I agree.
And I think part of what is going on right now is there are revolutionary movements across the political spectrum, right? Around on questions of race, on questions of class, on questions of religion, and then and on questions of sort of trying to go back to some make America great again idea. And there's a lot of excitement, but there's a lot of fear. And I think part of one of the questions right now is, do we want a politics that opens ourselves to revolution? Or do we want a politics that tamps down on those things because they're scary as all hell?
Sure, but I think that we can also think or expand the semantic range of the idea of revolution, because you don't have to take arms to actually make a revolution. You can shift discourse. You can just avoid playing performative politics, as the Democratic Party has been playing, and do serious structural and policy reform. And that is a revolution. A revolution in terms of refounding the terms upon which this republic has been functioning since its constitution. But that's my idea. So I don't want to push it over on others. My English is failing me today. So I'm going to leave it at that.
It's good. And the question of whether revolution can happen absent violence is an important one, and Arendt would agree with you that in some degree it can, but it does require an overturning of something. And
yes, sorry, no, because in her essay about civil disobedience, I mean, what Arendt is saying is that there is a way, right? There is a way these are my words, transformative change in civil disobedience to make, because she really, feels close to the law, right? And the constitution of freedom in this society, even if it's not for everyone. So she's saying like civil disobedience is trying to make the law all that the law can be. And that is also a revolution. And that leaves the mob of Wednesday outside the political and outside civil disobedience in style and in substance as well.
Yeah,
Can I say one quick thing, Roger?
Yeah.
I think that one of the problems is to call it revolution is a bit of a misnomer, because revolution would suggest that there was some sort of ideology, conviction, belief, reason. But a lot of the people that we saw in that horrific evening of dissent or brutality, I don't think that you could claim that all of them were revolutionaries in any way, shape, or form. That was it was, I don't have a word for it, but it made me think of why when Aristotle objected to democracy, I suddenly have begun to believe or understand what he meant, because when you looked at the lawmakers who were sitting there in the Senate or the Congress, they were all, or primarily middle-aged white men who had absolutely no concern for the people that in the country, or not at all for anyone outside the country, and they are lawmakers. It was, I mean, I totally agree with Bill's outrage, because I am still not calm from that whole event. And, we can talk about Hannah Arendt and her concept of revolution, which is brilliant, but I don't think that you could even begin to apply that name here.
Yeah, no, I think there were probably different kinds of people in it, but I think the majority of the people in this were a mob riled up by a president who has been lying to them for the last 3 months or 4 years, however you want to look at it. And to that extent, there was not much revolutionary fervor in that mob, I think is a fair, more than a fair statement. John. John Stern, are you here?
Thank you. Thank you. First, Roger, I want to thank you for the piece that you sent in about the habits of democracy. I found it very helpful. So just to mention that, the context of my thinking preceded yesterday's events. I don't want to go there. I'm not going to go there. I have my many thoughts that are parallel, and I have my indignation is, I'm sure, is equal in the room, and I think it raises other issues. But where I was in the reading of this particular segment of the essay, where I was going to, and what has troubled me has been, of course, the disintegration of the terminology of politician in this country, particularly here, to the point where it's even defined in a dictionary, which I checked, the Webster, that it's called that we're dealing with a manipulative. It's changed the whole essence of the dialogue or the definition of politics as I believe Hannah Arendt was speaking. But what I was thinking in terms of the context I was thinking about was, with the demise of the era that we've had internationally where powers spoke to each other, and we have this whole new concept that there are adversaries out there that will not adopt our similar way of thinking, and that our dialogue with them is, in some respect, we're going to be talking at one level, they'll be talking at another level or hearing at another level, and we may not be hearing them. How do we reconcile all of this with the injection of an atomic bomb or the power to destroy humanity? How do we achieve that space or that opportunity for dialogue at all?
Yeah.
Or I didn't feel that I kept looking and trying to reread Hannah her lines, and I just kept running into a stone wall. Maybe you can help me either go through it or over it.
Well, I mean, look, John, I hear the question, and I'll tell you that. So, I mean, first of all, we'll talk a little bit more about this next week, in the sense that the next week is on the question of war, the reading. You know, and what she says at the beginning of what we read this week is that, you know, we used to say that war was a continuation of politics by other means. And she says there was something good about that, right? You know, you need to sometimes continue politics by other means. I don't know if you're going to agree with that, but I think that's, if I remember correctly, that's what she says at the beginning here. And what we have now is, obviously this is not 100% right, because we've had plenty of wars, but what she says, I mean, she says this a number of times in her writing, and this is maybe a question of whether you think she might have gotten this wrong, but she thinks wars will disappear. And she thinks wars will disappear because of the incredible technological destruction that wars now carry with them, that make you know, fighting a war almost a suicide pact. Now, one thing we can say is that since Arendt wrote, there hasn't been an all-out war, right? We had 2 all-out wars in the 20th century, and since she wrote, we haven't had one. So if you want to sort of support her argument, you can say, well, there have been skirmishes and there have been battles, but there hasn't been a war, at least in the sense that, you know, you mobilize fully and you are willing to sacrifice everything to win. And so in that sense, so far she's been proven right. But she wants to argue that the loss of war as a meaningful possibility in international affairs prevents us from acting, but it boomerangs back into domestic affairs as well, insofar as the sort of the need to keep order enables a kind of brute force to emerge amongst the government, in which we give the government sort of this carte blanche to police and control us out of our fear of disorder, both internationally and domestically. You know, I take it to be that part of her argument. I mean, I have to admit, sometimes reading these pages is a little confusing for me. But I take that to be, when she says on page 152, the last page of what we read for today, in our current crisis, the prejudices that stand in the way of a theoretical understanding of what politics is really about involve nearly all the political categories in which we are accustomed to think. But above all, they pertain to the means end category that regards politics in terms of an end purpose lying outside of politics. So that's the first point, right? The prejudice is that politics is a means and end. Therefore, that it's a means to sort of some end, be it security or life or you know, happiness, whatever. The second one, as well as to the notion that the substance of politics is brute force, namely that politics is about using force to tamp down and keep order, because freedom is not found in politics. Freedom is found in the social and in private spheres and in things outside of politics. And finally, to the conviction that domination is the central concept of all political theory. All these judgments and prejudices arise from a mistrust of politics that most certainly is not unjustified, right? It's not unjustified to mistrust politics. But in our present prejudice against politics, this ancient mistrust has been transformed yet again. Ever since the invention of the atomic bomb, our mistrust has been based on the eminently justifiable fear that politics and the means of force available to it may well destroy humanity. Out of this fear rises the hope that men will come to their senses and rid the world of politics instead of humankind. That sort of insight is what drives much of this essay, Introduction to Politics. Now, let me say, she ended up never finishing this book and never publishing most of this stuff. It's not clear to me if it ever made sense to her. You know, it's not clear to me what she did with it. But that's the argument she's making here. I don't know if that.
Well, I want to add one other dimension here that I think is more current and more present, is the advancement of technology to the point where, never mind an atomic bomb, just any developed system can be totally disrupted, or has the potential today, through technology that maybe only a few of us understand or can grasp. And the implications of that can be another form of war. It doesn't have to be total annihilation, but what it can be is an absolute disruption of civilization through the use of technology in the hands of an errant human being or group, which I don't know how the original intent of politics, which I buy into, the whole idea that you enter a space and you try and leave your ideology you're always going to go in with a prejudice, but you leave your belief system, you try and put it out to the side for a moment and listen. And I don't know if that's possible anymore for the human race, that we have this tremendous divide that's emerging, and now there are means of disrupting society that we can't even, I don't think we can even, I can't comprehend. I know it exists and it's out there.
Yeah. I think that's fair. You know, and are there people and ideas that we shouldn't listen to, right? This is a big part of debate today. All right, Stephen, and if people need to jump in, let me know, but I'll keep going down the list. Stephen.
Thanks, Roger, and Happy New Year, if that's still
we forgot that. Yes, thank you. Happy New Year to all you all. It seems like this year so far, only a continuation of the last one. So.
Yes, it refuses to die, that sucker. Two quick questions, Roger. They're just sort of technical interpretation questions, not anything too substantive. When Arendt says on 117 that the men in the Agora would be speaking with and persuading each other, and goes on in other pages to say pretty much the same thing. I guess my question is, what exactly were they trying to persuade each other about? These folk were all from the same class. They were the same gender, the same race. Were they looking, did they have a vision of the polis, or was it just some sort of practicalities that weren't connected with the necessities of life, because that's something else? But what exactly were they arguing for? And my second question is from a little farther in the essay. If the necessities of life aren't to be provided by politics, or I'm not sure if they are or they aren't, but where else could they be provided? Isn't the political realm where we make decisions about how the needs of our citizens can be provided for. I'm a little uncertain as to how that's supposed to work. So it's two separate questions. But
they're actually related questions, okay, Stephen. I think they're both part of what is one of the most common objections to Arendt's work, right? And it's an important one, which is Arendt talks all this stuff about politics and politics and politics, but all the things that we think politics are about, right? Stimulus payments and housing and healthcare. She says, "Oh, that's not politics. That's necessity. That's life." Well, thank you very much, Hannah Arendt. What's politics? And aren't you just taking all the important things and saying they're not politics? So I think those two questions go together, and I think they're a common response or complaint about Arendt's work. And so I'd say, so I'll say this: the questions, your second question, but the questions of the necessities of life are certainly not unimportant, right? We need healthcare, we need food, things of that sort. But Arendt thinks that those are questions which can actually be best maybe to some degree at a low level addressed by administration, by bureaucracies, or she doesn't think we should, honestly, I mean, she thinks there's a minimum level of what should be given and provided to make everybody safe and healthy, but she doesn't see that as the question of politics. Now, I think there's a lot of good objections to her on this, but so what does she think politics is about? She thinks it's about speaking. It would be about today. How do we rethink elections? How do we rethink? Should we have citizen assemblies? Something we've been talking about at the Arendt Center. How would we rethink what white supremacy is or what race relations are? It would be having what she considers to be sort of the big question conversations. It could be, should we have more of a welfare state, right? That's a political question. How to do it, she thinks, is a question of administration, right? To some degree. This is one of the problems with Arendt is, she draws these lines to give us clarity about things. And I think that's very helpful. She really makes us rigorous in our thinking. And yet, if you take the lines too rigorously, it becomes sort of absurd. Yeah, of course, to some degree, politics has to deal with, healthcare, but she doesn't think it's the only thing it should deal with. And if you get just caught up in that, you stop talking about the questions of what does it mean to live a good life? What does it mean to be healthy? Right? And those are the questions to some degree that it's a hard question. What is politics? Should we have a revolution? Should we have reparations? I think those are political questions for her. But to be honest, she doesn't say much about it, and it's one of the constant and I think not unjustified critiques of her work.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Benjamin.
Hi, Roger. So just sort of building off on a little bit what we were talking about earlier, I guess, talking about sort of the moment we're in politically, the thing that I'm struggling with, the idea of politics as kind of this like conversation, this, willingness to be together, is it doesn't seem and I guess this is what people have always thought. It doesn't seem like there is. Can you do that when one side is very much invested in not doing that? Right? Like at the end of Eichmann in Jerusalem, she says like the sentence of death is carried out because he didn't care to live in a world with Jews and was all right living in a world completely devoid of them.
Yeah.
And I think that like at least an echo of that is present in the motives and the politics of at least the far right protesters, but then sort of that attitude seems like it leaks out into other facets of society. It doesn't seem to me like the gap was healed after, after slavery, after the civil rights movement. That it's fine to say that like Trump created an alternate reality that people are living in, but he didn't create it out of whole cloth. It wasn't like, people listened to what he said and were like, oh, I guess rather than being accepting of, Black and brown people, I guess they do suck. It was something which is sort of fomented in there. And I'm not sure if she would say that that's all right, as long as it doesn't cross a line. I mean, I think I could see passages where she seems to say, yes, there will be groups and divisions and they will have antipathy and some will come out on top and some will come out on the bottom. And that's a bitter pill to swallow for me reading this, certainly. But I'm talking a lot here, but like the idea is how is this? It seems like this is a process that's carried out by people who are interested in doing it in the first place, right? Like not really related to quote the mob, and it's hard to know how, for me to know like how that process would spread more effectively than kind of the prejudices of the mob in one way or the other. Yeah.
So thanks, Benjamin. Ben, I think one slight correction, and I think it will be important for what I say future. What she says about Eichmann is that he deserves to be killed. You said because he doesn't think Jews should, share the world. Right. No, that's not what she said. He deserves to be killed and extinguished from the earth, she says, because he sought to carry out the thought that Jews should be expunged from the earth. And so this is one of those questions that constantly comes up, right? What's the connection between having an opinion and seeking to carry it out, right? It's one thing to state an opinion, which is offensive. It's another thing to carry it out, which is not only offensive, but criminal and sometimes more than criminal. So I think, I think it's an important distinction, that should we criminalize opinion or should we criminalize the acting on opinion? I think what happened on Wednesday, as you said, crossed that line for many people and rightfully so. And it was, it showed, I think, that a lot of people who have these opinions are willing to act on some of them. What exactly they were acting on is to me unclear, or acting to accomplish. But they were acting, and as a result, they should be punished, certainly criminally, in my view, every single one of them. And I think a lot of them will be. I hope a lot of them will be. But one of the things that, again, this is one of those distinctions that Arendt makes that drives people crazy. She thinks you should be able to have offensive opinions, and you should be able to say offensive opinions. She just doesn't think you should be able to act on them. And, we can say, well, if you can't act on them, why should you be able to say them? Or you can say with a lot of people today, isn't saying them a kind of action? And isn't it making us unsafe? And the best person who makes this argument is my friend, Jeremy, my former teacher, Jeremy Waldron, you know, who gives this great example about hate speech and says, you know, if you're a Muslim father or mother and you've got your child next to you and you come across this billboard and the billboard says Muslim get out, how do you explain that to your kid? Isn't that not just speech? Isn't that hate speech in a way that makes the world unsafe and unwelcoming in a way that is it makes it not a shared world? That to me, you know, that example which he gave, which I find he spoke it at the Hannah Arendt Center conference 3 or 4 years ago, is to me one of the best arguments for hate speech legislation and hate speech regulation that we have. I don't think I think there are arguments that can respond to it, but I think it's there and one has to take it seriously. But Arendt's view is that, you know, those opinions are part of the public sphere and that our job is to hear them and argue with them. You don't have to agree with her, but that's her position.
Roger and Ben, can I jump in on that?
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
One of the things I think is really fascinating, particularly about the billboard example and also with what happened on Wednesday, was the nature of the public space as a literal shared world, as a physical location. That became the contention point, and rightly so, that we have a distinct difference in how two different groups were denied public space.
Right.
In the shared world. And when you look at a billboard, you're talking about that's in the shared world. And so then that becomes an entirely different use of the agora, a different use of the Senate. And now that changes the difference between speech and actual built things in the world, or how they are actually restricted.
And that sort of relates to what I was thinking as you were saying that. Thanks, by the way, and Roger too. And maybe this is something Hannah Arendt talks about otherwise, but I have this nagging sense that I like the conception of the place to speak and the idea of, you know, speaking and existing, but I can't help but feel somewhat like it's presupposing the idea of a neutral society, a neutral ground that will take the actions of a particular person into general account. And I think what got people, at least in part, fired up about Wednesday was not just the fact that there wasn't a strong police response. It's clear, you know, superposition alongside what happened at, say, Black Lives Matter protests, where it's clear that, you know, I wouldn't call them similar actions, I guess, but if you wanted to completely decontextualize them, being somewhere you're not legally meant to be, doing something you're not legally meant to do, is treated very differently depending, like the society itself almost has a bled over kind of opinion, and, you know, related to history, I'm sure. And that influences the ability of these politics to happen in a way, right? I think a lot of the argument is the more stabilizing that you want to be and the less radical, the more you sort of default to the imprint of the opinion that society has, which is historical. And in the case of America, racist, right? And so that's where I think some, like, my frustration at least comes in with it. I really like what Arendt says, but I think I don't understand how you address these, like, longer running and sort of one level up in abstraction, overall societal, just sort of, I don't even know what to call it. I'm not trying to, like, personify society as like a godlet or something like that, but, you know, it's hard not to see there be a sort of polarization, like light passing through a polarized membrane, right? It's you can see that something is there, and it's hard to know how to address that through the idea of the agora, on account of the agora itself as part of that society. And maybe that's where she thinks revolution is the solution at that point.
And let me ask people, does anyone want to jump in on this question?
I'd just like to add,
I just want
Roger, if I may, that on this question of speech versus action, that is the realization of your opinions into behavior, we actually have laws that regulate our behavior to some extent. They may be administrative, but they are laws nonetheless. And to think about acting against the law, when you do that in speech with another person, you are breaking the law. It's called conspiracy. And so there is a regulation even on pre-active thinking. I don't know exactly how to put that, but that's what conspiracy laws are about.
You're right. And I would, I have to imagine that there are going to be a lot of people, including potentially, I assume you saw the DA, the DCDA is looking into accusing the president of conspiracy. As far as I'm concerned, he should be. Anyone else? Someone else wanted to say something,
but there's going to be a lot of finger pointing, so yeah, we'll see how that plays out.
Someone else had wanted to say something. I couldn't tell who it was.
I have a question.
Me. Oh, go ahead, Dina. You're up next anyway.
Okay, I was wondering whether the text will answer the following question, which is, where does the impetus come from that we want to use this text to help us understand what happened recently, what has been happening? When Arendt says that the question no longer is what is the meaning of politics, but whether it still has meaning. Is that what we're trying to do when we ask, well, how can we use this reading to understand what's happening? Or is this reading not telling us that this type of application, this kind of purpose politics, isn't what she's actually asking about?
Yeah, I tried to say something about it at the very beginning, and that's what got me into trouble with the two-sidism, I think. Because to me, where this text is meaningful today is to help us understand why so many people hate politics and why so many people are angry at politics and politicians. And I think it's because politics has become meaningless. It avoids the hard questions. It avoids the fire. It avoids having the real hard questions that split the country apart. And it tries to sweep them under the rug through a combination of force, brute force, and, appeals to a kind of good citizenship and order. And I think that if this text has use, what I'm trying to suggest is that its use is to tell us free politics. Overcome your prejudice that politics is meaningless, that politics is simply about order, and allow a lot more heat into your politics. That's what I take the meaning of this text to be. But that is going to lead to a lot of disorder, and it's going to lead to a lot of uncertainty, and the economy is probably going to suffer for it, and people are going to be hurt, people are going to be killed. And part of what we're talking about is, do we want to have the courage to free politics to engage in these really hard questions, or do we want to sort of run away from it and let politics just keep the economy running, and let our group do this and that group do that, and not have to really engage in this?
Excuse me, Roger.
Yeah.
Who was the young woman who just spoke?
Dina.
Dina, I think that you might be directing that towards me, but let me just tell you an anecdote. The other night, I got off of an afternoon, 2 days ago, right, of calls, And the last call was from a friend of mine in Washington, and I asked him what was going on. He said, man, this place is blowing up, da, da, da. Get off the phone, and I understand. At that point, I go on a Zoom call with family members, 2 sisters. They are roughly my age, Black women, born in 1948 and 1951. And they were on fire and angry. And they were already spitting this thing out. White men are trying to burn down the Capitol. And I said, and I began to do this Hannah Arendt thing, Roger, which is, my sisters, less heat, more light, less heat, more light. Bill, what the hell are you talking about? Less heat, more light. I said, well, the important thing right now, we are angry. We know there's systemic racism. This is me speaking to my sisters, right? However, are we part of a movement, a multicultural, multiracial movement, which takes us back to Hannah Arendt? And I started telling them, I believe in politics. Politics is how we negotiate between us, is how we talk between us, is how we live in a common world. This did not go over very well with them. And later I felt a bit like an asshole because I was not able to hear what was behind their anger. And so I think I brought some of that here today. I'm asking this text, asking Arendt, how to make me not full of bullshit. How do I tell 2 women like that who have been raped, who are Black women living in this country and have been, telling them to calm down and take hands with your allies who might be white people? I have a sister who says she does not trust white people. And I'm saying, no, we've got to get past that. That's prejudice. These words are all resonating in the text. That's what I was doing at the top of the text. I wanted to have the courage coming from Hannah Arendt, a woman who wrote, I couldn't believe about how miracles worked into this. I wanted her to tell me how you can really face down people who are living in real time, real oppression, and tell them, calm down, think and feel less, think. Take hands, make coalitions, learn how to be political, which is, and then we're back to the question, what is the meaning of politics? That's what I was doing. That's what I wanted the text to do. Thank you.
I didn't direct my question to you at all, actually. My question was more, but now that you've said that, what I was trying to ask was whether this text doesn't ask that question and doesn't therefore answer it. And maybe it's a flaw in the text that it
maybe
doesn't
it's a flaw in
so,
us that we have not demanded that the text do it.
Yes,
maybe it's a flaw in the way that Roger has been leading us. Maybe
I'm
it's
trying
a flaw
to
in
ask,
the facts.
But I'm trying to ask the question, and if the answer to the question is that the text doesn't give an answer to this,
what are you going to do with it? The text doesn't. What are you going to do, my sister?
Well, then I have to grapple with that and what
that's
my
what we're
investment
doing. You and I
is.
are grappling
Yes,
right now together.
That was the purpose of my question. But I'm just trying to ask it without fear that it may not provide the answer.
It doesn't provide the answer, unfortunately. Another thing I want to say to John Stein was, I wish we could replace nuclear war with the environment. The fact that there are young people now who feel that they're the last people who will be able to have clean water, clean air. The whole planet is now faced with annihilation that is not atomic weapons. That is, so this text is really, we know that Hannah Arendt is lacking in certain degrees, but it's not about Hannah Arendt in a way, is it? When we come together, it's about us. Now, this is the wrong platform for me to get on a soapbox, I know, but that's how I answer your question. We cannot hide behind Hannah Arendt and what she did or did not know. We're faced with something that all of this about race and difference and sexuality is mute if we are not able to keep this planet alive. The young are saying that. So I'm sorry, I'm turning into a bully. I really I respect it. I really do have to go right now. No disrespect. I do have to go.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
May I say something?
Yeah, who said I can't? I don't know. Clara.
I just want to say, although it could sound naive, that Arendt never gives us an answer. And that is fascinating for me. I mean, she always saying, and that is the relation between freedom and politics. You in your present, you guys, you have to find the answer. And I like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a question she asks on page.
If I may, I don't think I quite got my point across, and I'd like to just make sure that I try one more time. And that is, I think the text is actually saying that she's inviting us to think of politics that doesn't have a purpose. And I think living with that kind of suggestion is actually quite haunting to us. I mean, it's a scary proposition. We would very much like for politics to have a purpose, and it is almost unthinkable to us that it shouldn't or doesn't have one. And what she wants to do is think about what the meaning of politics is. And we'll read the third part of this, where she makes that distinction, I think, quite well. And I don't want to sort of take sides. Does she do this or that, or do I agree with her or not? I don't think it's really relevant whether I agree with her or not. But she's actually imagining a politics without a purpose, and that seems to be what is so incredibly difficult for us to stomach, to live with, the idea that politics doesn't have a purpose.
I think you're absolutely right, Dina. That's the radical claim, that our prejudice that politics has to have a purpose, has to be a means to an end, and therefore it has to serve life or make us more comfortable or whatever.
It might be too late. It might be too late. I mean, we might not be able to live with the idea that politics.
And I don't think she's saying we should go back to the Greeks,
exactly.
Right? There's not like a nostalgia. I mean, I think it's a mistake.
But we should talk about her rather German tendency to interpret the Greeks in a certain way that she shares with Hegel, Nietzsche, and Heidegger.
Although she also loves the Romans, and by the way, she also loves the Americans. So I mean, she picks up a lot. But I think, I think Bill's question, how do we make her give us answers? And, my view, and I think your view, Dina, is, look, I don't read Arendt to get my answers. I read Arendt to provoke me and help me ask better questions. And that's, now I think what Bill's saying, and the challenge is, well, shouldn't we be then, after we read Arendt, having those discussions and trying to figure out the answers? Yes. And I hope we are.
Absolutely.
I hope all of us are doing that, in our lives. I want to just point us to a passage that we haven't talked about on page 147 to 48. It's about 5 pages from the end of what we read today. And Arendt says a couple times, and this is something she says also in The Human Condition, that she talks about the emancipation of the working class and of women, 2 categories of human beings who have been subject to force throughout modern history, pre-modern history, clearly represents the high point of this development. Well, the development is the total exclusion of brute force, of the immediate dominion of man over man from the constantly expanding sphere of social life. And then she says, in modern society, the laborer is subject, this is on the bottom of 148 to 149, the laborer is subject to no brute force and no domination. He is coerced by the direct necessity inherent in life itself. Here then, necessity replaces force. But the question remains, is it easier to resist the coercion of brute force or of necessity? So this is a very, again, another controversial aspect of Arendt's writing. I mean, I think to say that the labor has no brute force and no domination is a more than controversial claim in today's world. But what she's saying is that with the workers' movement and with the women's movement, and now you could say with the civil rights movement, this is what she would say. We don't have to agree with her. She's going to say that there is not dominion. There is not brute force that is suppressing women or suppressing workers or suppressing Jews or suppressing blacks. Now, again, she may not be right. In fact, she's probably not right. But what she's saying is there's a desire to exit this force from society and to make social relations equal. And the result of that is 2 things. One is we then subject people not to brute force, but to necessity. And 2, we then transfer the brute force that was in the social world to the political world. And that politics becomes, she talks about in the next paragraph, the displacement of force from the private space of the household and the semi-public sphere of society was undertaken quite consciously. We took out the relations of force from the social sphere and the private sphere, and we moved it into politics. And there's an increase in force, she says, employed by the public hand, by the state, whose use of force, so it was believed, could be kept under control since it had been explicitly defined as a mere means towards the greater end of life, of society, and the free development of productive energies. And what she's here worried about is, of course, Bolshevism and Nazism. The move towards giving more and more power to the state with the idea that the state will use it responsibly is, in her mind, incredibly dangerous. And so she says, I mean, one of the questions is, well, could you remove force from the social world and not hand it over to the political world? I think she would probably say no. I mean, I think she thinks that the force is going to exist somewhere. Dominion is going to exist somewhere. And this is one of the, again, really controversial and yet provocative parts of her work, which is that in our effort to create more and more social equality and social freedom, she says, we have eviscerated political freedom. We've displaced political freedom and turned politics into dominion. And that's the danger she's confronting in her work. Who was next? Inji or JKUZ? I don't know who that is.
Hi, Roger. My name is Jan.
Hi, Jan.
I'm JKUZ. I shorted it.
That's fine. That's fine. I just didn't know.
I'm new to the group.
Great. Wonderful. Welcome.
Well, I've been here a few times, and I'm a bit new to Hannah Arendt. And I don't know much about Karl Jaspers at all, but I do have a question about two moments in this essay on 128, where she talks about that conversation between people and our that you already quoted earlier, that we know from experience that no one can adequately grasp the objective world. And so our conversations with each other is part of this shaping of the reality that we live in and share. And then the discussion on 131 about the university. And I was just wondering about if she's in some dialogue with Karl Jaspers, and if we have some time to maybe talk about him and or that relationship toward reading Hannah Arendt and understanding her better. And so that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. And welcome. Yes, of course. I mean, I assume you know, I don't know if you know actually, but she was Jasper's student, and certainly in the post-war period of her life, Jaspers was one of her 2 or 3 closest friends and confidants. There is a group of people in this group who are reading Karl Jaspers together. If any one of you are here, maybe you can write to Jan and offer her insight into maybe reading with you if you want. We have talked we have talked about Jaspers a fair bit. If you wanted to go back to on YouTube to the sections in the essay, the 2 essays on Jaspers in Men in Dark Times, we talked about. But yes, Jaspers and Arendt. Jaspers is enormously influential on Arendt, both personally and philosophically, and around this idea of communication and talking and listening to each other is a big part of that. I can't go into it just fully right now, but we did teach a whole section on Arendt and Jaspers in the Men in Dark Times book, and it might be good to take a look at that. Does anyone else who's been reading Jaspers want to add to help me with answering John's question? I don't know if any of you are here.
I'm here. So I just wrote, I was in the middle of writing to Jan and to Jennifer that, or anybody else, if you'd like to be included in the Jaspers group. It takes place right after this so I'm at a different time zone. So what time are you guys?
We're at 2:38 right now. We're already
so it starts in half an hour. It's at 3 most of your time. And you have to send me an email so I can get you invited to the Zoom. I can give you my email. If you can see my name, it's Daphna, and then it's at eastlink.ca, eastlink, one word, .ca. And then I can issue you an invite to the meeting for the Jaspers group.
Thank you, Daphna. I'm going to let Ingie ask the last question because she has her hand up and hasn't talked. Before I do, is Susan Oberman here?
Wait just a minute. Jennifer wrote my email incorrectly. My name is Daphna, not Daphne, so it won't get to me. So it's DAPHNA at eastlink.ca. Okay, guys?
Thank you.
DAPHNA.
Susan, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
I'm here. I just thought I'd get, Susan has been a longtime member of the group, and she has worked for a long time in mediation and discussion. And she and I have been talking. She proposed some ideas. And we have a new website that just went up today called the Hannah Arendt Center Dialogues Project that Susan is going to help run. So Susan, before I finish, let Ingie ask the last question. I just thought because it fits with what Daphna and Jan were just saying, could you give a very quick description of what the Dialogues Project is going to do?
Yes. What I'm going to try and do is put people together in groups of 4 to 6 people. They will then figure out a time that works for everybody. And it's a chance to further explore what we're reading in Arendt, and at the same time bring in a lot more of what I think was needing to happen today here, but usually we don't have time for, which is all of the other experiences, emotions, everything that is going on for each of us in reading Arendt and in dealing with the times we're living through. And after what happened on Wednesday, I think it's maybe even more timely. So anybody who wants to join in a dialogue group will be able to get my email. I'll put you together with other people, and then I'll be a resource if there's any help needed in various ways. So I hope this will fill a need that.
Thank you. So it's very exciting. So it's for people who want to continue the conversations we're having here, but in smaller groups where they can talk more about it. There's now a link on our website under the programs tab, and also I think on the VRG page, and you can sign up. And if you sign up, Susan will get an email and she'll contact you and put you together in groups of 4 to 6 people to have these further conversations. So I think it's a great opportunity, and I want to thank Susan for proposing it and helping to make it happen. And I hope people, it's going to be on the VRG page. I'm not sure if it's on today. I mean, I know the website is live, but we have to just figure out where to connect it, but it will be there soon if it's not already. Ingie, you get the last question today.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. So I just, sorry, I'll be trying to be quick. First one is rather comments. First one, maybe I will just save that for later. So the question is, I think action is important. It seems to be important in Hannah Arendt's work, but then this word enlarging, sharing experience for the joy of just to talk about the word is also heart of politics. And I think that sharing multiple experiences is really important, but it doesn't really always lead to the kinds of actions that respond to the historic injustice and violence that, which is why I really appreciated Bill's presence today. And also So I think that the question comes back to the acting and judging, and the judging for thinking about what's the right way to I don't know, respond to the historic injustice, etc. And so I feel like do they undermine each other, like acting and judging, or I just feel like I guess I just have a question for you, Roger. Like, what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, judging is, when she says that something like that politics, we have a prejudice against politics, right? She wants to say that to the extent we have a prejudice against politics, that prejudice is and is not a judgment, right? It's not a judgment because it's thoughtless, and it differs from judgment. But what it shares with judgment, she says, is that is the way that people recognize themselves and their commonality, so that someone caught up in prejudices can always be certain of having an effect on others, right? It's a kind of unthought judgment, and allows us to recognize ourselves in commonality with others. And yet, she says, it's not tied to a personal experience, right? That's sort of the key here. Our prejudice of politics against politics today, she says, is actually not tied to a personal experience of politics, because we've largely exited politics. And so we've lost the experience of politics as an act of freedom or speech in the old sense, or in the sense that she's talking about. And we've and while people like Plato and Christians and others had an experience of being outside of politics, and needing politics simply to preserve it, we sort of just coast on that. We don't have that experience. I don't think she thinks very much anymore. And so what she says is the only way to undo prejudices is not by criticizing them or arguing against them, but by going back to the original experiences and trying to expose people to politics and show that it's actually fun and exciting, and that would potentially repoliticize people.
Right. Yeah, I agree. But I think at the same time, what we bring it to the public space also is framed by our private experiences of, the daily experiences of me, talking to people, and what I felt, etc. So I just feel like this distinction between what has to be private interest and then me bringing my private angle of seeing the world to the public police is kind of blurry.
Right. Okay. Just because we're out of time, Angie, I'm going to end there. I think it's a good way to end.
Thank you.
I'm going to remind you that we're actually reading this week and next week. We're reading more than we usually read, so just be aware of that. We're reading The Question of War for next week, and it's from 153 to 190. So it's well, no, it's 37 pages. It's not that much, but and they're short pages. So look forward to talking with you then. All of you, take care of yourselves. This is a tough time, but I keep hoping we're turning a corner. But enjoy reading Hannah Arendt, and I'll see you next week. Thank you all very much.